Welcome, everybody. I'm Sara DiVello, your on-air Mighty Mystery host. I am thrilled today to welcome none other than Avery Bishop, author of Girl Gone Mad. Avery, welcome to Mighty Mysteries. Tell us about your book.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for having me on. Girl Gone Mad is a psychological suspense that deals with bullying. Actually, I don't want to say it's generational, but it basically follows a group of characters from when they were in middle school to when they become adults. And I don't want to say it's a revenge novel, but it's essentially a revenge novel, I guess, in a way, is kind of how it turned out.
Awesome. Well, I just want to take a brief minute and share some of your absolutely amazing blurbs because you got some good ones. So Kimberly Bell, internationally best-selling author of Dear Wife, who has also been our guest here on Mighty Mysteries, says old grudges resurface with a vengeance in Avery Bishop's Girl Gone Mad, where former it girls are dying off one by one. This twisty tale of bullying, toxic teenage friendships, suspicions, and obsessions will keep you glued to the pages all the way to the unexpected ending, an addictive debut where revenge isn't as neat or pretty as it seems. Ooh, I love that. And she is such an amazing author. We loved having her on. Emily Liebert, also a guest on A Mighty Blaze, says suspense, secrets, revenge, karma. The pages practically turn themselves in this convoluted suspense novel, which has it all. I could go on and on because you've gotten so much amazing praise. But what I really loved was from page one, you can tell that this is a book about girls, revenge, jealousy, bullying, all of these things that are so important to talk about. So thank you first for bringing that to the page. And let's get right into it. What was it like for you to write from a female POV?
So even though this was kind of billed as my debut, it's debut under the pen name, I have written over a dozen novels, and several of them have been from female point of view. So it's not necessarily my first time doing it.
Okay.
It is my first time doing it, though, in this genre. The other genres are more thrillers or action thrillers. So in that realm, even though it is a female point of view, I guess readers kind of give you more leeway, even if you are a male writer, to like how to do certain things. So with this novel was definitely different in that it's much quieter. It focuses much more on characters. Even with my thrillers, I like to really focus on characters, but this one focuses much more on characters and really is much more character driven.
It's so interesting. Well, first of all, let's just pause a moment and admit that Avery Bishop is a pseudonym. I did not know that when I booked you for this, first of all. So I'm already mighty intrigued by your mysterious name. So let's deal with that first. How did you choose Avery Bishop and why?
So, as I mentioned before, and it is a pseudonym. I've done a lot of other novels under my own name. And starting out, I mean, I don't want to go way back into my career, but one of my, in middle school was when Jurassic Park came out. So I was I think I was in sixth grade. I became a huge Michael Crichton fan, started reading all Michael Crichton books, and then I started reading Stephen King books. And mostly it was Stephen King who really got me into wanting to be a writer. So because I like Stephen King, I would write, I'd focus on horror stuff. So my first couple of novels were more supernatural horror. And then I started falling away more towards thrillers. And I had even written like a literary novel, which is probably one of my favorite novels, but compared to the rest of my books, it seems like there's no readership for that. So I've been in different genres in the past, and I just knew that when you're hopping to different genres, oftentimes it is a good idea to keep them separate. So I know some authors are fine, going to genre, and it works for them. But I knew with this book, it just, even though suspense and thriller kind of are in the same camp, in many ways there is a difference. So as I was writing this book, and at first I did plan on putting my own name on it. That had been when I had the initial idea. But as I was writing it, I realized it was a much different type of book than my usual stuff. And so ultimately, then when I was shopping it around to agents and they would request the manuscript, the actual manuscript would have on the cover page, Girl Gone Mad by, and then in I think it was either parentheses or brackets, gender neutral pen name. Because at that point, I didn't have Avery Bishop. I just knew that this was a novel that was probably be best to be published under a pen name.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that. You're actually our first author, I think, not just on my series, which is of course the Mighty Mystery series, but I think you're the first Blaze author that we have interviewed who has a pen name. So this is very
Wow.
interesting to me. And I know I'm sort of just fascinated by it. So thank you for explaining your process. Now let's get back to the female POV. So under your real name,
Yes.
you have written from a female perspective before. Do you find that hard? Do you find that hard? Do you not find it hard? Does it come easily to you?
I don't find it hard. It's just another character, if that makes sense. As long as I feel like you have, as the author, as long as I have in the motivation, or I understand what the character wants, I never really think about it, to be honest with you. Some books just lend themselves more to having a female protagonist as opposed to a male protagonist. And there are times where, I feel like it's almost seamless to be able to kind of transition back and forth. Even in books where, you would have multiple characters. There was even one novel where basically I had to, half the chapters were from a male point of view and half the chapters were from a female point of view, and switching back and forth. I don't know. I just never really thought about it, to be honest with you.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, because for me, as a cis identifying, woman, cis woman, female identifying, for me, my next book I'm doing has a male point of view, and I literally spend so much time trying to think what it must be like to walk through the world as a man. And I live with a man, my husband, and I think,
Yeah.
but a lot of the time I find myself thinking, like, what is that guy thinking? Because you see the dishes, but you're
right.
not doing them, are you?
So I will say I have been blessed by being around other people who are females. Mm-hmm. So like my agent is a female, my editor is a female. I've had other readers who have really helped me out with the manuscript, who have provided feedback for certain things. So if I did have one of my female characters maybe saying or doing something that wasn't natural or was, that was questionable, they would easily call me out on that. So I don't want to make it seem like it was, from me to start to finish was the final manuscript. I had a lot of help in that regard. But like initially kind of stepping into those shoes, or really just, writing from a female point of view, ultimately I kind of feel like they're just characters.
Yeah.
I just want, it's just a character. I really just try not to really kind of think about it, because I kind of worry if you think about it too much, I think that's when you really start, questioning things. And I'm not a writer who really outlines. I just kind of sit down, and usually I'll have an idea, but oftentimes I'll let the book kind of just progress the way it is. So I'll let the characters, and I usually love when a character I'm writing and a character might say something or do something that might not mean much at first, but then later in the book, all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, like, I don't know. Like actually in Girl Gone Mad, there's a throwaway line where the main character, Emily, talks about how in high school she had hired a private investigator to track down the girl that they had bullied back in middle school, but nothing had come of it. And I remember it just being a throwaway line where she just mentions to doing this. But then I realized a couple of chapters later that the private eye was actually going to play a rather significant role in the story farther down the line. So yeah, those are things that just happen. And they're always pleasant.
Yeah, that's really cool. So the girl that they bully, Olivia Farmer. So first of all, what made you want to talk about bullying? Did you have a sister that was bullied? Were you bullied? Why do you want to talk about bullying?
So I have worked for several years. I had worked as a mental health case manager. So I had worked with kids and it was primarily with adolescents and children. And that's a prime target for kids who have been bullied. The genesis for this novel, though, like goes several years back, and I can kind of almost reconstruct, if you'd like, how I wrote this novel, because it's really backwards, quite honestly, of how it came together. So in my other life, I write a lot of just more thrillers, but I knew that I really enjoy the suspense genre. I read it a lot, and it's always something that I've wanted to try my hand at. And so I was up in New York City one time for some event. I forget which was, whatever it was, but I had met a friend of mine who works at one of the big publishers in marketing for drinks, and we were talking about books, movies, whatever else. And I honestly don't even remember how it came up. But at some point, I made a crack about like, these suspense novels. I want to write a book that has the word girl in the title. And he had turned to me and all serious was like, you should. And so I was like, all right, well, I have a guy who works in marketing for one of the major publishers saying I should try this. So I was like, okay. And so really it was the title that first was one of those ones that I forget how it even kind of came into my head, but it was this title that I just started thinking about. And I remember even looking it up on Amazon and looking around, and it had never been used before. And I was surprised because I was like, well, that's a pretty good title. But I didn't really know what the story was about. So, and I'm really kind of going in depth here. So
that's how we
basically,
like it on the
basically, so one of my designers that I work with who does the cover arts, oftentimes on their website, they'll have what are called like pre-made covers. Okay. And so I remember seeing a cover that was remind me of very much of like an Megan Abbott type cover.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We've also had Megan Abbott on.
Well, and again, yeah, Megan Abbott's amazing. So, and of course, this is the cover that eventually was made from the publisher. I'm talking about even before the book was written. Okay, and then I'm going to show this cover.
Oh yeah,
I have it on my.
I'll show this cover, and you show that cover.
I have it on my iPad, and you can kind of see where I'm going with this. Oops. Let me go up.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. So obviously these are completely different covers, but if you can see on this cover, it's like I knew I wanted to write more of an adult type suspense novel, but the model on this, you can only see, you can't really see her face, but you can see where it's more of a teenager maybe or something along those lines. And so, I had this cover. And again, this was one of the things where the story really kind of built around that. Because then I started thinking, okay, well, maybe it's one of these things where stories where, obviously we want to focus on adults, but maybe there's something that happened when they were younger. And then really it was one of those just more thinking about it, what ifs, and it really kind of came with this idea. And I, because I do kind of lend myself more to the thriller end. Well, what if, what if there's a murder involved, or what if there's a death or an unexplained death, some type of mystery, obviously. And then really that just kind of, snowballed from there. So the bullying aspect was something that came the more I started thinking about, well, why would because that's something that I always ask, why? I might want to have something happen, but the question is always, well, why is a character doing this? Why is this happening? So the question was, why would there be a unexplained death, or why would there be a murder? And that's really what led back to the idea of bullying. And for me, it was one of those things too, because I've never really seen it done much in contemporary fiction, especially with thrillers or suspense. Oftentimes you see it in YA, which I have seen some some not happy, I guess, reader reviews complaining that it's a YA book. And I'm like, I don't understand how it's a YA book, but I guess because the idea that anything has to do with kids is suddenly YA.
Yeah, I don't know, because I don't know anything about YA. I think the only YA book I read is Harry Potter, and I don't even know if that's considered YA. but yeah, what I thought was really interesting is that the way that girls bully each other is very different than the way that boys bully each other. And so I was really interested to see this play out on the page. So I was never bullied when I was a kid in school, like school age, going through the school thing, because actually I was homeschooled. But when I was as an adult in the workplace, I experienced female bullying. And it's something that people don't really want to talk about and women don't really want to talk about, because there's this feeling of like, oh, we're all supposed to be supporting each other. There's a lot of pressure and a lot of expectation that women are supposed to support each other, because, it's hard to be a woman in this world. And so it's like, well, we've got to stick together and help each other, but that's the party line, but that's not always how it is. And so, I couldn't wait to read it, because I thought it was so interesting to talk about it and so important to talk about it, and how come younger girls, do this, and do they grow up to be bullies as adults, or how do they feel about their previous bullying? So I just thought this whole thing was so interesting. For our audience, I just want to pause on something that you said, because we have so many passionate writers as well, and readers, and aspiring authors in the audience. Can you define for us the difference between, because you said you have previously written thrillers, this you consider suspense, although there is elements of psychological thriller in it. Could you explain the difference between how you differentiate those?
So there's my definition is completely, I don't think I really have personally a good definition. My editor actually, I think, summed it up nicely, where she said that oftentimes with thrillers, you'll have, well, suspense is more of the threat of violence, or the threat that something is going to happen, as opposed to a lot of that direct violence on the page. So thrillers, your author are going to have more of, like, you might see the murder, or you might actually, see the blood, as opposed with suspense, it's you hear about the murder, or someone might, might overhear something said, or they might hear a gunshot in the distance. And so that we never really get a sense of what that is. So it's kind of playing that fine line between the actual, because there were aspects to earlier drafts of this novel that was me as my, with my thriller cap on, was, I had, there was more instances of like maybe guns involved and certain things that would occur, which really, my editor had kind of pointed out that, that's, we want to, if we want to make this a straight suspense novel, we really have to play with those, well, I can't even think of the word, but, we have to kind of like follow those rules in a way, which makes, total sense. And I mean, part of me likes the idea too. And the great part about suspense is, I don't know, I always like that idea about what's not on the page, because I always find that what's not on the page is actually more disturbing oftentimes than what is actually on the page, if that makes sense. Because it lets the reader, yeah, I mean, it really lets the reader's imagination run wild. And that's almost, I think almost better than when you actually have, show some type of, if it's a murder or whatever else, an actual scene of it, as opposed to, how you have characters hearing about something like that.
Oh, that's so interesting. Because yeah, one of my questions for our mystery and thriller authors on here is, what do you think is the most important way, or the most effective way to build suspense, to keep the pages turning? And I think you just answered that. So thank you. That's fantastic. Avery, how long did it take you to write this book?
I'm trying to think. So typically, depending on, I mean, each project obviously is different. One time I wrote like a 90,000 word novel in 3 weeks. I mean, that was years and years and years ago. I think I just graduated from college. I was still living at home. I was working in a movie theater. I was subbing. So there were times where, I had the luxury of taking my laptop with me to the movie theater, because I'd work up in the booth running the movies. Or if I got called to be a sub, I would just say I'm sick today and just, write all day. And so, that's happened too. Or oftentimes, nowadays, depending on my schedule, I might be able to do at least a first draft in maybe a couple months, or maybe in 1 or 2 months, depending on what the novel is. The first draft for this, I want to say, took a couple months. But I will say the first draft was also very, very different from how it turned out. And basically, in retrospect, my first draft, especially the first draft that I had sent around to agents at the time, was almost more of like a pulpy paperback, if that makes sense. It was not a suspense novel so much as more of a, I don't want to say action thriller, but it definitely had elements. It was bloody. there was a lot of like violence and stuff that, was not really doing itself any favors. And so what happened was, I had one of the agents who had requested the full manuscript had basically come back to me, and they had said, we really like this, but we think it can be improved upon, and would you be willing to work with us? Basically, almost as an exclusive, would you be able to kind of go back and forth? And at the time they were talking, I was like, what are you looking to do? What are your notes? And a lot of their notes was basically, one of it was toning it down, especially the third act, where things got really crazy. And so at the same time, I had been hearing back from other agents who basically had the same type of notes, but none of them were basically willing to work with me as this other agency was able to do. So I said, okay, sure, let's do that. So, and also at first it almost felt like they wanted to change the entire book. But when I took a step back and I realized the book itself was not really, I mean, the spirit of the novel, nothing was really changing. Overall, the main plot was there, the characters were there. It was mostly just how the story ended up being told. The same thing with the flashbacks. Initially, because I guess I lend myself more towards writing thrillers, I didn't want to spend too much time in the past. So they would talk about how this girl, Grace, was being bullied. They would talk about, certain things happening. And I think there was maybe one or two little flashbacks, but that was it. And I remember one of the notes was, we would like to see more of these girls when they're in middle school. And initially the reason I didn't do that, because I didn't think there was enough to add. I didn't really think there was enough of a backstory. I mean, obviously, they were friends, but I didn't really think that there was enough to really lend credence to adding probably another 20, 30,000 words to the novel at the time. But then the more I started thinking about it and started really thinking about these girls in middle school, a story really started to kind of come together to really kind of even more impact what then happened later. And quite honestly, what I really like about how the novel turned out was seeing these girls then in middle school really kind of helped their characters then when they were adults. So seeing them in those two different time periods really helped with the characterization, as opposed to just seeing, them in middle school or them as adults. So, it was that interaction. Because one of the main things that I found about the book as I was writing it was that idea about, as kids, when you're bullies, a lot of people get older, they get mature, and they put all that behind them. But some people don't. They still, you're still having adult bullies. And so that kind of became a theme, especially, and then so the reason that the protagonist, Emily, and the reason I made her a therapist was mostly because she had always felt guilty. Because in many ways she felt responsible for, bringing this girl into her group and for everything that happened to her. So it was a lot of her guilt that was really driving a lot of the story, and things kind of went from there. But again, it was one of those, when I sat down, I kind of had an idea how it would end, but again, I don't really outline. So it just worked out nicely. I'll just say that.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, another question that I ask is, are you a plotter or a pantser? Clearly, you're a pantser. So
clearly pantser. Now, I will say there are benefits, obviously. I remember watching actually a recent interview with you with Jeffrey Deaver, and I know that he is all about plotting right now, which makes sense, because for some writers it really does. I kind of have the concern that almost an outline is almost suffocating to me. Because then I would feel too wedded to it. I have heard some writers will actually use like screenwriting software, and they will essentially write a screenplay as the outline, which intrigues me, and something that I think I might want to try someday, because in that way you're essentially writing the book without writing the book. Because you're not like, I don't know. I mean, and also maybe I just don't have a good definition of what an outline should be. Because, I'm sure like Jeffrey or a lot of other writers who do it, they all have their different processes on how they want to do an outline. As opposed for me, I don't know. I guess my idea of an outline just doesn't work. Now, I will say the problem sometimes with that, being a pantser, there are times where you'll spend more time having to go through the editing phase. Because then, there are certain things where, and I mean, that's happened too, where my most recent novel, or I guess the next Avery Bishop novel that I turned in on my first draft, I remember getting towards the end and writing probably a 5,000-6,000 word chapter. And even as I was writing it, I realized this is not going like I was not going to keep this chapter. That like this was going in a direction that I don't really want the book to go in. Again, it started letting it tell itself more towards the thriller end of things. And so I finished it just to finish it, but then immediately I just set it aside. And that was something that at least, I've noticed that I've been able to do, at least after working on A Girl Gone Mad, where I'm able to kind of differentiate more the thriller and suspense more than I had previously. So even, I started kind of working on some notes for a third Avery Bishop book. And, I don't know, it's always a learning experience. I've written a lot of books, I've been doing this for a long time. but every day you're just learning something, you're learning something new. So that's always exciting.
Yeah, I also am a pantser. I have not been able to plot or outline so far. And the interview with, I've actually, Jeff's been on twice. And the first one, we got really in depth into his process for The Goodbye Man back in
Yeah.
March. And he spends, 8 months outlining and is often 150 pages. And I mean, but he's a machine. He's amazing. So
Yeah.
I thought to
Yeah.
myself, perhaps I should dip a toe in the outlining water.
Well,
I
and
do
see,
spend so
even,
much time revising because then that's the downside of being a pantser.
yeah, but I mean, an outline of 150 pages, God, that's almost half the length of a novel. So, I mean, again, I'm sure his process for how he outlines, and for every writer who outlines is completely different. I've tried it in the past. I just never really liked it, but I'm sure if there were different ways about going about it, I might be more open to it. But typically, yes, I just have an idea, or sometimes I don't even have an idea. I just might have like a character in mind or whatever else. And there are times, like even I mentioned before, that book that I wrote in like 3 weeks. That was essentially, I just had like the first chapter. And so I sat down and write the first chapter, and then the rest of it came from there. So, and it's always fun. I mean, I always like that because it's like, you're exploring, you're going to a place that you've never been before. And it's kind of scary because you could waste a lot of time too. I mean, there are times where first drafts are much longer, and, you cut out 20, 30,000 words, and, the tighter the better, but that's still a lot of work I mean, I had, on book 2 right now, I had a call with my editor the other day because we were talking about, it's getting close to being finished, but there still needs to be some more work done. And we were talking about this one chapter in particular, one chapter that I'd spent a lot of time on. And it was that thing where, like, do we really need this chapter? And that kind of goes back to the idea of, killing your darlings. I don't like using that term just because it sounds weird, I guess, killing your darlings, but that's really what it comes down to. I mean, there are certain like things that I think writers have to kind of get out of their way oftentimes, because I think there are times where, they might really like a scene or really like a character or whatever else, but it's always asking that question, like what is this right for the book? And so if it's not right for the book, then it shouldn't have to, then it shouldn't be there.
Exactly. Separating what is merely interesting from what is integral is always difficult challenge for me and for many of us. So was there any titles you said the title came first, so you knew from the beginning this was it. And then you said, because I always ask about the cover. Oh, go ahead.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I was even going to say, I mean, so then even with the cover, it's like, well, okay, like Girl Gone Mad, obviously I didn't want to just have the title and then like have a story that had nothing to do with the title. So that kind of, I mean, sometimes you'll have that with certain books. So again, this was so backwards because, there are times where, I'll just write a book and I still haven't decided on a title yet, or, something from the text will kind of work its way out as a title. So with this, it was basically, it was just so backwards. I can't even get into it, but yeah. So the idea was, Girl Gone Mad. And then I like the idea too, we don't really know which girl. So that was, I always like titles that kind of have more than one meaning. So that was, so obviously the main character in this novel, well, actually, and that's a weird thing too. The protagonist in this novel, her name is Emily, but I also kind of wonder is the book really about her, or is it about the girl, you know what I mean? Or is it about the rest of them?
Yeah.
Kind of like, yeah.
Awesome. Well, Avery, we have so enjoyed having you here on A Mighty Blaze. What's one thing you want people to leave having felt or thinking about when they read your book?
Particularly for this book, I mean, I guess the boring answer is just I want them to be entertained. I mean, I'm not writing, it's not, it's not like deep literary fiction. Like, I mean, but if they can, I guess, kind of think more about how they treat others, that would always be good. Again, I didn't really set out to write a book about bullying. It just kind of worked out that way. But I have heard, I mean, based on some of the reader feedback, it has brought up a lot of memories for a lot of readers on how they were treated. I mean, I've even gotten some emails already from readers about how they were treated and bullied when they were in school. And so, again, that was nothing that I had really, set out to do because it's pure fantasy. I remember actually seeing a recent reader review complain because it's not as like a self-help book. And
Oh
it's
my
like,
God.
no, it's not a self-help. I certainly hope no one really takes it as a self-help book. I mean, it's a thriller. It's pure,
Step
fantasy, I guess, in a way.
step one, find a cabin. Step two, get a towel.
Yeah.
That's a separate book. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for joining us here on A Mighty
Yeah.
Blaze. And again, we have a special partnership with bookshop.org, which supports independent bookstores. So you can buy Avery's book. It will be linked in the comments, and you'll be supporting independent bookstores and getting this great summer read. Avery, thank you so much for joining me here on A Mighty Mystery.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. Appreciate it.